Hey everyone, it's the Grumpy Meeple, and I am coming back at you with some more Marvel Zombies Kickstarter related content. And this one is very near and dear to my heart because this is going to be a video about how I was totally right about where this campaign was likely going to end up in terms of funding, and everybody else was wrong, basically. Or at least other content creators were wrong. I love being right. It's just one of my things. My stance from the beginning was that this has no chance in hell of coming even remotely close to Frosthaven, and I stand by that. And I saw some other content creators who were maybe caught up in the hype, love the IP, and were giving it a little more weight maybe than it deserves, and who just weren't kind of factoring in like basic kind of facts about the campaigns and how they're different, that who were saying, oh, this is gonna get 15, 16 million, this is gonna pass Frosthaven. And I was just kind of chuckling to myself like, no, it's not going to. So one thing we need to cover, though, obviously this campaign is like halfway over now. You might think to yourself, hey, Grumpy Meeple, it's real easy. Hindsight is 2020, and it's real easy to make that claim now that you have access to data from KickTrack and you've seen the trajectory of the campaign and such. Just to head that off, right here, we've got a video from a content creator that I admire. Marvel Zombies, should you back it? This is going to beat Frosthaven. Here's my comment 5-ish days ago. I don't remember exactly when I posted it. This has no chance in hell of passing Frosthaven. So this was not something I came up with long after the campaign launched. This was obvious from even before the launch. I was actually surprised that people were even making that claim, and I thought it was just like a hilariously poorly founded claim that this could even sniff Frosthaven's ass in terms of pledges. But let's get into it. Why? Why do I think that? Why did I think that? Why am I right? And why will time prove me to have been right? First off, pricing. Right off the bat, this campaign is expensive. Unduly expensive. It's expensive to the point where it's actively pissing people off. And you've got the 130 pledge, which is $30 more than your standard Zombicide pledge. You've got the 240 pledge, which is a FOMO play to get people to buy the Resistance box, even though it's likely coming to retail. And then you've got the $410 pledge that, only the hardest of the hardcore fans was ever even going to consider. This was already a barrier to entry. 130, that's not horrible. Frosthaven was $100 for the core box. It's 10 times as much content as this. I mean, there's absolutely no question about that. I don't care how many new miniatures they throw into this. The pure raw gameplay that you're getting out of Frosthaven is orders of magnitude larger than like every Zombicide game put together times 5. So you weren't getting anywhere near the kind of content you were getting. And you had a higher barrier to entry, and shipping costs have gone up. We're still in the pandemic with manufacturing costs and stuff, so like everything was going to be more expensive. And so when you have this kind of weird fake pledge that doesn't even get you the full set, and your real pledge is $240, you're immediately, chopping off 30% of the market that would never even consider dumping that much money on a Zombicide game. So price, I think, was the first factor. It's just a little high, a little on the high side. And you can even see that in the pledges and the way people are backing, because the people who are backing this are largely backing the enormous $410 Galactus pledge. So These are the hardest of the hardcore, or just like straight up kind of like board game investors who are hoping to flip this thing. The Galactus in time. That may or may not work out. Shipping it is going to be incredibly expensive both ways. I have thoughts about that, but I don't really care enough to get into it right now. And then the Resistance Pledge, and almost nobody is backing just the basic Undead Pledge. So you're not getting the kind of mass of board game fans. You're getting a very narrow field of people who were ever interested in this in the first place because it's a zombicide game, and there are whole swaths of the board game community that despise zombicide games or despise Ameritrash games in general, and who were never, ever, ever going to consider backing this. And a lot of those people would have backed Frosthaven. So, price. Right off the bat, it's a little expensive. The price can't even come close to making up the gap in the number of backers. There's a theory that, it's so expensive, so it'll make all this money. No, that's kind of really not how it works. This isn't expensive enough to do that. Kingdom Death Monster is, where you can spend $3,000 on it. That's a big enough jump where a small number, or a relatively small number of pledges can make a huge difference in your funding. This isn't that expensive. It's way too expensive, but it's not, a $2,000 game where if you get 2 or 3 or even 400 people to back it, all of a sudden you're really moving the mark in your pledges. So, price, that was the first barrier. The second barrier is something that I just talked about, and that is kind of the appeal of it, the broadness of the appeal or the lack thereof. Zombicide is a niche product. It isn't kind of embedded in the cultural zeitgeist of board gaming the way that Gloomhaven and subsequently Frosthaven was. This is a thing that appeals to a very specific set of people. I happen to be one of those people, and that's great. And I like Zombicide. I love Zombicide. I'm a little over the constant reuse of assets and selling me the same game over and over again, but I love Zombicide. I played the shit out of Black Plague, and second edition. But I'm a very specific type of gamer. You're Eurogamer. No chance in hell that they would ever even look at this. It is beneath them, or at least that's how they would feel about it, I imagine. You're not going to get your casual player because it's too expensive, again. So there are whole huge chunks of the board game Kickstarter community that this has no interest for. Whereas Frosthaven crosses a lot of those barriers because it's only $100. It's relatively cheap compared to your kind of higher pledges on Marvel Zombies. So maybe you would get, a more casual fan to back this. It's also known that this is a colossal, gigantic, hilariously enormous amount of content. So again, you're going to get people who buy this just to be the game that their game group plays for the next 2 years. That's not Zombicide, and never was and never will be, because it's just too shallow of an experience. I love it, but it's a shallow experience compared to this. You're also intersecting with a bunch of hardcore groups that wouldn't necessarily be interested in Zombicide either. You've got your hardcore dungeon crawl crew, the kind of people who are playing maybe Madara, Arena the Contest, waiting for Storm Sunder, and who played the absolute shit out of Gloomhaven. They're interested. They're backing this. Your Eurogamers are a lot more likely to back this than they are Zombicide, because it's known to be tactically rich and crunchy and strategic and not a dice chucker. That's another thing too. There are people who just hate dice, who just don't like throwing dice. They don't like the randomness that comes with that. They would never back Marvel Zombies, but they would back this. So right there you've got, multiple kind of subgroups of the board game community who would have an interest in this that wouldn't have an interest in Marvel Zombies. And so it was always clear to me that this isn't going to get anywhere near the backers that Frosthaven did, and as a result, it's not going to get anywhere near enough money for the reasons we talked about earlier. And this plays out in the numbers. This game had 83,000 backers. Okay, that's more than like the last 4 Zombicide games combined. 17,000. This is going to end up around 21,000. I hate to break it to you, just like Undead or Alive did. And just like Second Edition did. I mean, look at this. It's, it's a pattern. And Invader was a little less. So your market is much smaller, and your appeal is much more limited, and so you're not coming anywhere near Frosthaven. And anybody who said that you was caught up in the hype or trying to make a clickbaity title to get people to watch, which is smart. I should do that. Maybe somebody would actually watch this shit if I took ridiculous stances like, this totally niche game is going to beat the biggest, most widely kind of beloved game in the history of the industry. Maybe if I made that kind of video, I'd get 16,000 subscribers too. But I'm not going to do that because it doesn't interest me, and I don't give a shit how many people watch this. I'm just going to say what I think. Third of all, you've got the kind of politics of it, or the community feeling towards these two particular projects. Frosthaven, again, like the most popular Kickstarter in board game history, 83,000 backers. The number one game on Board Game Geek for the last year at least has been Gloomhaven. So they just put out an amazing digital version of Gloomhaven as well. So this had cultural cachet unlike anything else. Isaac's Childress, whatever, is kind of widely beloved, and especially was back when this campaign launched. He had a ton of cred coming into this. Everybody knew Gloomhaven was an incredible game, and the community around Gloomhaven was really tight-knit and huge, and there was a lot of community involvement in this campaign, which there is absolutely zero in any CMON campaign, much less Marvel Zombies, where they're just crapping out expansions every 3 days on a schedule that they set a year ago. This game, you were engaged. There were quests. There were scenarios that you were working through during the campaign. And so this had a huge, insane amount of kind of buzz and goodwill behind it. This does not. This is a cynical cash grab. As interesting as it looks, that's what it is. That's what most of CMON's games are. And everybody knows that. And so you have an entire swath of the board game community, again, who not only doesn't like dice chuckers or doesn't like Ameritrash games, but just don't like CMON. They don't like their business practices, their Kickstarter campaign, FOMO practices, whatever it might be. CMON has as many detractors as they do supporters, I would think, at least. And just to be clear, with all the stuff that I've said with this game over the last week, I still count myself very much as a CMON supporter. I like these games, even though they are a little derivative. I do think their miniatures are fantastic, and I like miniatures. I just have a very specific problem with this particular campaign. And then if you go back through my channel, you'll see I had similar complaints for previous games in the Zombicide universe or the Marvel United universe or whatever it might be. but I like CMON. I have a ton of CMON stuff. So I don't count myself as one of those negative kind of detractors necessarily. I count myself as somebody who expresses their opinion and doesn't give a shit what anybody else thinks about it. And my opinion is that this campaign is kind of shitty. So you run a good campaign. If CMON comes out with the next game and it's a completely unique, awesome new experience that is transformative and blows me away, I would be the first person to be on here blasting out nonstop positive content. And most of my content around even Marvel United X-Men was positive because that game was a tremendous value proposition. And we're going to get into that next, but this really isn't. It's much less of a value proposition with a much higher barrier to entry in terms of cost. So while I don't consider myself to be a CMON detractor kind of by default, there are those things exist. And I think very few Frosthaven or Isaac Childress or Cephalofair Games detractors exist. People who would just blow it off because it's from Isaac and he's whatever. Now, he has built a little bit of negative, kind of feedback with some of his responses in updates and such. I've seen other channels cover that, where he seems to be dismissive of backers who don't agree with choices he's making in the design or whatever. But again, that's a tiny, tiny little fraction of this 83,000 people. I think that this had just much more kind of cultural cachet and goodwill, much more community involvement, much more excitement around it, a real sense that you were participating in something and that this was going to be special, and much less of that kind of nobody. I can't imagine anybody sitting around saying $100 for Frosthaven. What a cynical, soulless cash grab. That's not a thing. So you're getting like 20 pounds worth of board game out of this. So, and gameplay, not just, hey, I can use Daredevil now, and while his skill set is virtually identical to Doctor Doom's or whatever, I do get to move this different guy around, and it is slightly tweaked. This is hardcore gameplay content by the bucket full, and people know that. And so, yeah, none of the negativity around this that something like Marvel Zombies was always going to have because it's a zombicide game. Okay, the next factor that I think plays a part in the impossibility of Marvel Zombies ever coming close to Frosthaven is the value proposition on hand. So this is pound for pound maybe the best pure gameplay for dollars kind of conversion in board gaming. It was $100. Gets you the main box and all of the goodness inside. They have other pledges, where they're giving you the solo scenarios, removable stickers, the foretell narration, blah, blah, blah. This stuff is cool. It adds value in and of itself, but just looking at the basic pledge, $100 for this stuff is absurd. He could easily have charged $200 and not gotten 83,000 backers because a lot of people just won't push that much money into a board game, but he might have gotten close to the same amount of total funding. I mean, just look at all this shit. 100 overlay tiles, 50 monster groups with ability cards, just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cards. 250 tokens. Like, there's the amount of just stuff in this box is immense. And it's all gameplay relevant. 100 plus scenarios in the scenario book, which is 2 scenario books because they couldn't even fit it all into one wire-bound book. So the value proposition here was never in question. There is nobody, I can't imagine anybody has ever uttered the words, Frosthaven is too expensive when referring to this campaign. That's just not a thing. Marvel Zombies is a much dicier value proposition. And you really have to be interested in the secondary market and flipping stuff to make it a value proposition in any way, shape, or form. This is going to come with, I don't know, I don't care enough to look, 8, maybe 10 scenarios, right? That you're just going to play over and over again, right? No, you're not. You'll be lucky if you even play all those once. I know I have many Zombicide games. I still have come nowhere close to playing even every single scenario that's in Zombicide because it doesn't hook you the way that a narrative campaign like Frosthaven does, and it doesn't demand the same amount of attention. So this is going to have, some missions, a relatively small number. They're going to be pretty samey. They're going to be very samey. I promise you they will be very samey to shit you've already purchased in the past from CMON. They're smart. They're not just going to take 2E and replicate it in Marvel Zombies. They'll take a little bit from here, from 2E. They'll take a little bit from Invader. They'll take a little bit from Black Plague and Green Horde. They'll mix it up a little bit. They'll slap some Marvel Zombies lacquer over it, and here's your new quest. But it's going to look a whole hell of a lot like all the other quests that you've ever played in Zombicide, because there's not that much kind of room to grow in the franchise as it currently is. So if you're looking at this purely as a value proposition for money spent on a game I'm going to play, even this is your only chance, basically, at achieving a decent value out of this game. This pledge is horseshit, as they have said nothing to indicate that X-Men Resistance is exclusive to Kickstarter. I don't believe it is. And there are no stretch goals that are associated to X-Men Resistance. So you're getting every single thing from this pledge in terms of unlocks in this pledge, with the exception of the Resistance core box, which will be at least $20 less expensive on miniaturemarket.com. And it could be a great deal even less expensive than that. I mean, Miniature Market, I don't know if they're still running it. They were running like an 85% off CMON stuff sale like a week ago. So who knows? You might find this for $60 Black Friday or something like that. And the lack of stretch goals, while I do not necessarily want them associating a bunch of stretch goals to this to FOMO you into buying it, the lack of them makes this a non-pledge as far as I'm concerned. And the Galactus pledge, I mean, you decide for yourself. It's a huge statue. I'm not trying to take anything away from it. It's cool to have huge stuff. I would say you'd be much better off putting your money into a Sideshow collectible than into this giant plastic thing. But it's up to you. It does have some gameplay associated to it. It comes with the Silver Surfer, if people love the Silver Surfer. So I don't think this is a very good value proposition from a gameplay perspective. If you're talking about flipping it on the secondary market, no CMON game is a bad investment in that sense. Yes, if you back this, you will make money. I think to maximize the money you want to make, you would want to completely ignore this pledge, because again, that's coming to retail, and consider this. I think the Galactus Pledge, there's the possibility, and maybe even the very high likelihood, that the stuff that comes in that Galactus set is going to be highly valuable. You might make money on it, but honestly, if that's all you're interested in, what I would strongly suggest instead is that you back the Undead Pledge and then you back the smaller add-ons. These are much easier to flip, much easier to break apart and sell individually, take up much less space, and they contain, like, literally in terms of the raw number of miniatures that are exclusive, these have more miniatures, exclusive miniatures in them than this does. So these, and the barrier to entry, the price is so much lower. That's really the only way that you can look at this as a value proposition, is in the most cynical, like, flipper mentality, where you could back this thing, flip this stretch goals box, and pay for the entire Undead Pledge. So you get a free copy of the game. And probably you'd even have, a fair bit of money left over. But in terms of gameplay, it's not there. It'll never be there. I don't care how many expansions they put out. I mean, they're not even trying with some of this stuff. Let's take a look. Where the hell is that goddamn expansion? This doesn't even come with any scenarios. It's just more heroes, more villains, and then Thanos has a unique mechanism, obviously, because he's Thanos. So I think in terms of the value proposition of this, only think of it as a good deal if you intend to flip a large portion of it. And there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes it makes sense to back a game and essentially get this for free, make a little extra money. It totally makes sense. But if you're talking about value proposition as amount of gameplay per dollar, this is lacking, severely lacking, especially when compared to this. And then finally, just like there are just like basic logistics of these two campaigns that made it a virtual impossibility that Marvel Zombies would ever come close to Gloomhaven, or Frosthaven, I should say. This campaign was only like 16 days long. This was 32 days long, something along those lines. That's twice as much time that it's on Kickstarter. It's twice as much time where it's sitting there with that We Love campaign or whatever. It's on everybody's talking about it. Content is being created about it. And so this had a much longer runway, and that contributes to its enormous, number of backers. This is pretty short. They're just in and out, farting out stretch goals in the exact same way that they always do. Like, there's nothing to see here. There's no reason to come back to this campaign. You're going to get the notification, oh, cool, they put out a new expansion. I'll make sure to back that so that I can flip it for 3 times what it costs. But there's no community engagement. There's no nothing. This campaign, the time that it ran for, the time in which it ran, Frosthaven hit at a very particular time in kind of the history of humanity when the pandemic was spinning up, essentially, and people were home. They didn't know what the next few years were going to look like. They maybe had the expectation of having additional disposable income in the future. I'm trying to see when this actually ran, but I think it was April of 2020. Because they were going to receive stimulus, payments and such. And so, yeah, the Pledge Manager launched in May, so the campaign probably ran in like March, like right when the pandemic came up. So, and this isn't hitting at that same kind of touch point in human history where we were looking for something to be involved with, and engage in. And so you've got the smaller campaign, which is more expensive in a much more niche audience, with none of the kind of cultural or kind of zeitgeisty backing of something like Frosthaven from a company that takes as much shit as they get praise, and just a value proposition that just simply is not there in terms of pure gameplay. Which all adds up to, there was no way in hell that this game was ever going to come anywhere close to Frosthaven. And even if you were looking at if you were watching this campaign like I was on day one, and you were seeing it was hitting 3 million or whatever, all you gotta do is go look at the Frosthaven campaign. What is this? 4.4 million on day one. It had like over $1 million more on day one. So that is a huge, colossal head start that is virtually insurmountable. And the consistency of funding that this thing had, where it was still making, $175,000 on day 20 or whatever, and without, I would guess at least, without nearly as much of the kind of, like, oh, here's an expansion and we're going to see a bump. Maybe they announced a broken token. I don't know. But this was consistently bringing in money over a very long period of time. Whereas, Marvel Zombies, it's highs and lows even already. It's already on day, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Day 6, it's getting 99,000. Day 6 Frosthaven, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 126,000. So Frosthaven was outgrossing this on just like a day-to-day basis in some cases from go. The second day as well. What did we have here? 530,000 for Marvel Zombicide, 1.1 million for Frosthaven. So if you were sitting there on day one, if you are even remotely paying attention, dialed into like the kind of, or thinking about like the business, it was obvious that this was never going to get close to Frosthaven. You could literally just have come here, look at this one number on day one, looked at where Zombicide was at that point in time. I was there right when this thing launched. I saw how fast it hit, 1 million, 2 million, 3 million. But that didn't impress me. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. Everyone else like me is sitting around waiting to hit the pledge button. They're all pledging very high. They're going to pledge the Galactus, and then they're going to talk themselves out of it over the course of the campaign, and they're going to go back down to the lowest pledge. And so I don't know how you came to the conclusion that this was going to beat Frosthaven. And to be fair, like I said, I would doubt that anybody realistically actually came to that conclusion. They either got swept up in the hype, or they were trying to get people to watch their content. And so those are my thoughts on why Frosthaven could never be dethroned by something like Marvel Zombies. And I hope you found it interesting. I don't know, we dig into stuff a little bit here. We're talking about like the culture, we're talking about the specific pledge levels, and we're talking about like the economics of it in terms of value proposition and such. And so I hope you found this interesting. Let me know what you think in the comments. Maybe you think Marvel Zombies could still rally somehow. Maybe it will end up with $13 million. But I suspect it's going to end up right around, I don't know, 6, 7 million, maybe 8 million at the most, which is amazing. Congrats to Simon. But don't compare this to Frosthaven. It's just stupid. It makes you look stupid, and people like me are going to come out and spend an hour explaining in excruciating detail just how stupid that statement is. So I hope you enjoyed it. We're making friends here, folks. Making friends. I hope you all enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I will talk to you later.